Good morning, and thank you for joining us at the Toronto Global Forum. Let me begin by thanking everyone for the kind welcome back to this great city, and especially this morning, your great weather. We are a Florida-based business, and we've spent the last 2 weeks preparing for Dorian, well, actually preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, and our thoughts this morning are certainly with those suffering. From Dorian, it now looks like it will not hit the Atlantic seaboard as we feared, but all that effort was not wasted. It was a great planning session for the unknown, and planning for the future is the reason why we're all here this morning. In the past 30 years, I've had the fortune and responsibility for overseeing $100 billion in assets, both in the Canadian and US financial services sectors. Today, as CEO of ECN Capital, I'm overseeing with my team almost $35 billion of consumer assets on behalf of 90 financial institutions in the US. I have some perspective on the relative strengths of the economy and the positions of the US and Canadian banks as they lead us forward into the new economy. We're just a decade past the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. The global economy today is really a tale of two worlds. We have great countries like Canada, regions like Europe and China. Those economies certainly are feeling the impact of the trade negotiations and tariffs. Then we have the US. Despite the tariffs that have been imposed by both sides, the US economy is still doing well by most measures. In fact, you could argue the grounding of the 737 MAX has had more impact on the US economy than the tariffs have had to date. We're in a climate of low unemployment, low taxes, and certainly lower interest rates, seemingly moving to zero. This change in interest rate environment is a new paradigm for both government and business leaders. It's also true that across the US and Canada, that our financial services sectors have never been stronger. I can say that, from my perspective, the Canadian banking sector is uniquely positioned to lead the North American economy in both of our official languages. Canadian banks are based upon safety and soundness, which has stood our bank sector well in the credit crisis. It's worth remembering that just 10 years ago, the US financial services sector was in a very real danger of collapse. That speaks to our resiliency as an industry. At the same time, it reminds us how quickly circumstances can change, for the worse and for the better, as we look forward and try to prepare ourselves for what lies ahead today. To help guide us today, the Forum has assembled a tremendous panel of experts. Dan Barclay will be serving as its moderator. A couple points about Dan. He joined Bank of Montreal in 2003. He has risen through the bank. He is now Chief Executive Officer and Group Head of BMO Capital Markets and sits on the bank's executive committee. I've known Dan for a long time, and he is certainly a proven industry leader. I have a great deal of respect for his judgment, not just for his role as a business leader, but for what he does in the community, including his work with Children's Aid Foundation of Canada. I, like you, am looking forward to sharing his views, and I'd like to invite Dan to introduce his panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for the kind introduction, and for all the panelists that are here today, as well as to the audience. We appreciate you coming, and we appreciate you hearing us out this morning. You've heard from a couple of the introduction comments. We face a pivotal time as we think about our new economy. Whether it's political tensions, whether it's changing growth dynamics, collapsing interest rates, all things leading to a very interesting time. I hope what you'll see here is we've assembled a very unique panel to give us a perspective around those global institutions and global events. Each one of the panelists has a detailed bio, so I'll give a very quick summary, and then we'll jump in to getting their views as we think about the future. First off, Pierre Moscovici is a longtime senior politician in Europe, and he's currently serving as the European Commission for Economic and Financial Affairs, Taxation and Customs. Jose Luis Manzano is an Argentinian businessman and a former politician. He's the founder of the international firm Integra Capital, which focuses on private equity and merchant banking, principally in Argentina. Guy Cormier is the current president and CEO of Desjardins, a leading financial cooperative institution in Canada, largely representing Quebec. and Lady Lynn Forrester de Rothschilds, CEO of EL Rothschilds. She is a leading force behind the global movement of her equitable, sustainable, and inclusive capitalism, and is founder and CEO of the Coalition of Inclusive Capitalism. Welcome, all my panelists. To open the session, what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists spend a few minutes talking about what they believe are the biggest opportunities and challenges as we think about the new economy and where we're headed. I'll start with you, Pierre.
Thank you so much for welcoming me here in this wonderful event, the Toronto Global Forum, with a special salute from Europe. Canada is, of course, very special to us because we share so many values. We also are very strong and close partners in forums like the G20 or G7. And if you look at the recent event in Biarritz, it's clear that we are quite close, and it's also an area with which we want to exchange more, and I'm very favorable to the CETA to be ratified in the next months to come. I will talk about Europe. To tell you that in my view, Europe is still and is a good place to make business with, a good place to invest, a good place to live. As you told, I'm Commissioner for Economy, Finance, and also Customs and Taxation. And what I see is that our economy, although growing at a quite slow rate, is still solid. And we've got ahead of us, I think, 2 years in a row of robust growth, over 1% in this year, 2019, and probably a little bit more, 1.7% in 2020. You spoke about the financial crisis. Steve spoke about the financial crisis. We're clearly out of it. Now, Greece is not a problem for us. We're out of the systemic issue which it represented. Our public finances are much more solid. Our deficits are somewhere around less than 1%. So it has been divided by 6 in the last 10 years. Our banking sector has been solidified, and we have created a banking union. And the euro is now a currency with a role which is recognized. So, a good place to be. Does it mean that everything's fine? Of course not. We are facing international issues and also internal risks. And all these risks are clearly pointing to the downside. I'm not going to expand at this stage too much on international risks, but they're called trade first. And obviously, this damages our economy, and especially the German economy, which is the more opened of all economies in Europe, and the growth in Germany is very slow now. And the trade tensions, in my view, are a threat for the world and a threat for the economy, of course. We are also fighting climate change, and we need to define positions which are much more common than they are today. And we've got our own internal risks. I would mention 2 of them. The first one is Italy, although I'm not talking about politics. This is not in my schedule or in my payroll. But I would say that it's much better to have a government which is broadly pro-European and attached to reforming the economy, which might be the case for the next government, than a populist government which wants to fight the European idea. I have no regret for Mr. Salvini, to be clear. I'm not talking only about a politician, but as somebody who is leading the country. And the second internal risk, of course, is Brexit. And there I imagine that we will come back to this in the conversation. Very hard to predict. I would just say now that the EU, the European Commission, never wanted the no deal, that we don't want a no deal, that we think that it would be the worst case scenario for Europe, for the UK first of all, for the world too, that I think that we absolutely need to avoid it, but we cannot say that we will, because obviously this is a possibility. And so the political situation is uncertain, moving every day, and today will be an important day. We will know whether there can be or not elections, and we will have to look at the outcome of such elections if they come. But of course, our view is that the impact of a no deal would be really bad for supply chains, for financial services, and would lead to some uncertainty on customs issue, which I'm responsible for in the European Commission. So that's the background. To stop now, because I don't want to be too long, I would like maybe to tell you what are the next challenges for the future Commission, which will succeed the present one. It will take its office around November 2019, on the 1st November 2019. I would mention 3 of them on the economic front. The first one is to complete the Eurozone and to strengthen the banking union. We clearly need to have a full backstop for our banking union, and also to have a deposit guarantee scheme, which need to be built. That's the first item. Second, we need to reflect on our fiscal rules. I'm the guardian of them. I believe in them. But still, if it happens that we have some cold in the room in the European economy, then we need also to open the heater. And maybe we need to have a more cooperative approach between those countries who have high surpluses and those who need to reduce the deficits. I would mention on the one side Germany or Netherlands, on the other side Italy, and well, also France, one way or another, even if the situation of France is not comparable by any means to the Italian situation. And the third one is that we need to reinforce the international role of the euro. We see that there is a formidable power of the dollar, which is also something that helps to have unilateral action. I would mention, for example, Iran, which was a part of the discussions on the G7 recently. And we think that we need to have our own financial vehicle with the euro. I will stop there, again, to tell you that I'm certainly not pessimistic, that I think that the new economy opens tremendous opportunities, and that's the case with digital. Even if the digital company needs to be taxed properly at the international level, and I fully support the works that have been undertaken at the OECD level. The Commission is a participant to that, so we don't need to be pessimistic, but we need also to be prepared to any kind of situation, and to have policy options, and that's what we need now to address.
I sense a lot of meaty issues there. Jose Luis, why don't we turn to you for your observations on the biggest issues and opportunities that we see today?
Yes, first, thank you very much for having me here. I will speak a bit on Latin America as a whole and address why things move from one extreme to the other in several countries. When you look, Mexico went from a center-right government to a center-left or left government. Ecuador moved from a left government to a center coalition that came from inside the left government. Brazil moved from a left government to a center-right or right government. Uruguay, I believe, will stay with a social democrat, or kind of, because the two candidates are pretty much the same. And in Argentina, is moving from a center-right to a center-left coalition. And what is behind that? Well, what is behind that is, what is the driving force to me is that all of us that promote and try to get the region totally engaged in global trade and capitalism and free movement of money and goods and people. The movement of people is very important. We all look on trade agreement. The strength of Europe is not trade. The strength of Europe is the decision to create a common identity, which is Europe. So freedom of people has a lot to do with the stability in the agreements, but put that on the side. Having said that, it's not working. We fail on the inclusiveness. We fail on the timetable. We do the reforms, and we are very slow including the people. So whoever is there, you know, will move. Whoever is there, it moves. Normally, when you try to analyze why Argentina failed, we try to find 150 explanations. But a lot of people say, well, it's the Peronist. And this time it wasn't the Peronist, so apparently it's the country. and you say it's the elite of the country. Yeah, maybe the elites, we have always 80% of the responsibility. But when you look at the region, what we have lacked is timing. How you include at the same time that create the trade and the globalization process shows that the inclusion is part of it. Not as a trickle-down effect, but as one of the objectives. So it moves a lot to, all the challenges is this time, unless we show we are able to engage people and to feel that there is something for them in it. The next, because traditionally I grew in a world that when a government fails, you get an IMF package. Gone. Now you fail after the IMF package. So we have to do something that really works. On the opportunities, the wheel was already invested. You have to have rules, legal frameworks, security, investment, private company. The private sector is not going to be with the government. The governments are destroyed. It has to be the private sector, so the government job will be to create the conditions for the private money to be invested. Last minute in Argentina, I'm optimistic. I think it's still going to be a dip. Still it's going to be an aggravation of the crisis. But I think the guy is a moderate. The guy that tends to be elected, Fernandez, he's a moderate. It's going to be a very tense dynamic, but I remain optimistic.
That's great. Guy, let's go to you next.
Hi, how are you? Bonjour tout le monde. Thanks again to be with us today, and thank you for the invitation. Maybe just a few words regarding Desjardins, and you'll understand why I'm starting by that. Desjardins is the leading financial co-op in the financial services in Canada, and the #1 financial services co-op in North America, and the 5th largest co-op around the globe. It started 120 years ago in Lévis, Quebec, a small city, because there was some needs in the community for having access to loans, to savings and financial education. So it started as a co-op model, and now we're talking about a financial institution that has more than 46,000 employees in Canada, more than $300 billion in assets, more than 2.3, 2.4 billions in surplus earnings per year, and returns to our members and our communities of more than $389 million per year. So my point is the fact that the co-op model is something that can work and is sustainable on the long run. And when I look at the economy, it's sure that right now we are having discussion about trade tensions, climate emergency, inequality around the globe. But from my perspective, I think these are not the problems. These are the symptoms of something that is more tougher to fight again. And it's the fact that we are probably right now racing against something that we don't even know what. We're racing against another country. We're racing against another company. We're racing for more market shares. We're racing for 4 and 4. But the real symptom is the fact that we're too much focused on short-term gains, Why there's trade tension right now? Because there's some people who want short-term gains. Why there's climate tension right now, climate emergency right now, is because there's some companies, there's some people, there's some investors that are looking for short-term gains. And I think one of the main issues that we're facing right now, if we want to build a new economy, if we want to lead a new economy, is to try to switch from this short-term perspective to a long-term perspective. There's too much next quarter. There's too much next year. There's too much next election. This is the real problem, not the symptoms of trade wars and climate issues. The real problems are this concept of looking for too much short-term gains. And we have to switch to another, let's say, mindset. Just look at the GDP. GDP is nearly the measure around the globe to measure the strength of a country. And when you want to increase your GDP from one quarter to another, you'll look on what, you work on what? More consumption, more spending, so more pressure on the resources, more pressure on the people. Again, short-term perspective, because GDP is a measure that all the countries are looking around the globe and is now the measure for the last 25, 30 years that will give you the insight about how strong is your economy. And our economists launched probably 12 months, 18 months ago, a really interesting study about how should we look at the economy and a society with other indicators, 23 new indicators, crime rates, obesity in a society, health system. How do we measure the kids at school? How do they go to university? What do they learn? And other indicators that will give you a long-term perspective of your society. And I think personally that's one of the problems that we're facing right now in our economy. We can discuss about a lot of things like you said, Brexit, Europe, trade wars, and all these things. These are just symptoms. I don't think we're looking at the real issue that we have to face right now. And if we think of our companies and our private sector with more openness and more inclusivity, you will have a company that will look on the long-term perspective, not only the next quarter. You will look at a company that will be more transparent, probably. Climate impact, all these inclusive concepts. You will have a company that will also use more judiciously the resources that they have. You will have a company that will have the trust of the people. And you will have a company that will, a business that will have in mind the impact on their community. And that will have in mind the fact that they should reinvest in their community. And when they take a business decision, what's the impact on some cities, on the people, on the workers? And I'm not dreaming, because these companies exist right now. These are co-ops. I'm always amazed when you look at Uber and all these new companies that were thinking of shared economy or inclusive economy or social economy. And we want to build a new model. But I think we should look at a business model that exists for more than 300 years around the globe, that have been really resilient in the 2008 crisis, and that we can learn from this concept. Thanks.
Some provocative thoughts. Lynn.
First of all, thank you for inviting me. I always find this forum to be very interesting and also very important. And when you think that it's been in one place or another for 25 years, it's very unlikely that 25 years ago anyone predicted the kind of world that we're in today. So we should think about the long term, indeed, and what kind of world we're leaving for our children and grandchildren. And I think about it on a global basis, and then also from my country, the United States. What is frightening to me around the world is that you have two powers, Russia and China, that are clearly authoritarian, and we know where they stand and what their values are. And then when you look at the democracies of the world, the great democracies of the world, the very frightening thing to me is that we have countries that are veering between xenophobia, protectionism, and nationalism on the right to redistribution and socialism on the left. And that people are voting on an emotion based on their fear about their future. And if I go to the United States alone, the Federal Reserve just reported that the bottom 50% of Americans have just now, last year, regained their net worth, their total wealth, at the levels of 2008. And they're still 32% behind 2003 levels. And at the same time, Pew did a survey of the United States and 8 European countries, and 50% of people don't trust democracy. So there is a true link between the kind of economy we have and the democracy and the results of democracy that we can expect. There's no way to de-link those. And this is why it's so important, the topic of this conference, and the word that's come up several times on the panel, and also was part of the OECD framework commitment for inclusive growth. I talk about inclusive capitalism because I think that we need to take a stand that capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any system in the world. I mean, we have 700 million fewer very poor people in the world. But what that masks is that growth is not necessarily a good thing for everyone. And the levels of inequality that have been the result of our economic systems are just not sustainable. And we have to be willing to rethink the way that we look at our capital markets and the way that we run our businesses. So a co-op is a great model to take care of employees and communities and to create innovative products. But if you look at what the Business Roundtable just did in the United States, where they rejected their own 1997 statement, where they said the purpose of a corporation is to provide profit for shareholders, and they said they no longer subscribe to that sole purpose, that indeed the purpose of a company is to provide products that are safe, that people love, made by employees who are dedicated and love their companies and are well provided for, in a community that is defined by a common objective. And of course, in a planet that's not going to burn itself up. So that was an important statement of 274 companies, alongside the 32 companies that are global companies from the G7 signed in Biarritz, indicating that business gets this. And in our work at the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism, we partnered with EY and the CEOs of $32 trillion of assets under management went through the value drivers, the long-term value drivers for companies to state publicly in a Wall Street Journal ad that innovation, community, environment, society, and governance and talent are metrics that we should all, as corporate leaders, measure, just like we measure return on invested capital, just like we return revenue, just as we report revenue per share. If we begin to do that and we have a race to the top in the business world, we have a greater chance of having a society that believes that business and investors work for them. If we don't make it loud and clear that capitalism is inclusive, we're gonna lose the plot. I really believe it. So that's my issue, and I think the opportunity we have is to create inclusive capitalism.
Great. Well, as a set of opening statements, I think I got a lot to work with. I'm going to switch quickly into technology, because I think one of the things that flowed through some of this conversation is the undercurrents as we think about a new economy. I'm going to start with you, Pierre, on this one. When you think about it, and I think about what's Europe doing and the way it's approaching technology, big tech, how society gets advantage versus not, I think there's lots of change and lots of evolution of thinking. It's obviously disrupting a number of sectors. It provides a number of benefits. How do you think the policy interventions need to be to help set that balance between the privacy, innovation, and the future?
As I said, obviously, new technologies and internet are an opportunity, a tremendous opportunity, and digital economy is a tremendous opportunity for Europe. And that's not a point on which we are, to be clear, absolute leaders. We don't have tech giants in Europe. We've got a lot of companies which are quite competitive. We've got the capacity to innovate. We've got a very strong education system. We've got a strong workforce. But it's clear that we have some needs to upgrade our level on that field. And I would mention just 3 words on the policy choices. The first one is clearly that we need to invest. And that's why the present Commission, the Juncker Commission, the name of the President of the Commission, decided immediately in 2014 to launch a plan, which is called the Investment Plan for Europe, of some 500 billion euros, in order to sustain investment. And this is brought by the European Investment Bank. The idea is to help, I would say, some companies to emerge, but also scale-ups to develop and to become leaders in the sector. And one of the priorities, if not the priority, is the digital economy. Other priorities would be mobilities, but it's obviously linked, and everything that has to do with human capital. This effort on investing on new technologies must be concentrated and pursued. And that's why the next Commission will have to, I would say, develop the investment plan to make it as well stronger and more efficient. But again, this will help business opportunities there. The second word is that we need to create a digital single market in Europe. Europe is a very special continent. It's a continent of value. I heard what you said, Lynn. I heard what you said, José Luis. We've got a message, and this message is about liberal democracy. I've been myself in the G20 and G7 finance ministries meeting for 7 years, and I see the world changing with China, with Russia, but also with India. Sometimes the US are a bit disrupting, I would say, lately. And liberal democracies are, well, Europe, plus also Canada, Australia, Japan, and we need to move together. And that's why it's absolutely necessary to integrate Europe. Europe today are 28 countries, probably tomorrow 27, maybe we'll discuss about Brexit again. But each of them has their own regulator, their own rules, their own system, and this is certainly a very important weakness for us. And in the digital economy, we need to have a single regulator, we need to have a single market. This Commission has started the work. We have been proposing, I think, 14 regulations on that, but this also needs to be completed, and that's the next policy option for the future Commission. And the third word is about fairness, and that's what taxation is about. I'm the one who proposed, as Commissioner, 2 directives in order to tax the digital giants. The first one is a turnover tax, and the second one is the way to identify digital presence, because we don't know exactly where they create profit, where they create value, so it's very hard to tax them. I'm not a fan of taxation. I think that, as you said, business needs to be supported, but there needs to be fairness. And if people believe, you mentioned some very impressive figures, Lynn, that it's always the same who wins and always the same who lose, then you will have a very dangerous world where democracy will be in danger, where the faith in our institutions will be poor. And today, a lot of people in Europe, but all over the world, think that those tech giants, well, are made of companies with no rules, that they don't pay any tax or very little tax where they create profit and values, whereas other companies pay their fair share of tax. If I look at the tax rate for corporate in Europe, it's 23% for, I would say, normal or old-fashioned companies. It's 9%, as far as we know, for digital companies. And some of them don't pay taxes at all. That's what my colleague Margaret Vestager tried to fight, and she was very efficient, saying, okay, it's not normal that, I'm not going to name them because I don't want to sound anti-American. Some of the GAFAs, Apple, for example, pay no tax or almost no tax in Ireland. That's just absurd. And I think that we need, for fairness, to solve this issue at the international level. Very much welcome the fact that in the G7 there was a kind of agreement between France and the US, but the agreement is not a full agreement, it's an agreement on the agreement. Now we need in OECD to find the right solution. So invest, develop a market, and create fairness. These are the three words for me so that Europe can be a major player in that field.
Lynn, I'm going to go to you next. So if we think about technology, has it helped on inclusion or has it hurt?
Well, it's both. I think trying to stop technology is a little bit like trying to stop Dorian from hitting the Bahamas or the east coast of the United States. We don't want to stop technology, but compared to the 90s, when the internet was first emerging and we sort of saw it as an unmitigated force for good, and the people behind the technology companies as admirable actors, we've learned a lot. And we know that technology can definitely be used for very bad purposes, whether it's Russian interference in our elections, whether it's stealing people's data, or the really egregious things that happen with technology. We as a society, and hopefully as a global society, I mean, Europe is going at a different pace with respect to the technology company regulation than we are in the States, but it would be much better, even on the taxation issue, and this is a little, this is almost too utopian to even suggest, but we've got to find a way to bring power back to some international organizations to sort out the kind of regulation that we want. And I believe that we have to stay at the forefront of technology, the liberal democratic countries, because if we don't, a country like China will way surpass our capabilities, and we do not want to be behind the 8 ball on technology in 20 years when you meet here, where China is ruling technology. So we have to find a way to regulate according to our values, and that includes deciding how we feel about our privacy. How do we feel about the fact that Facebook has 5,000 points of data on 80 million Americans? I mean, is that okay? And is it okay that they commercialize it and we get nothing back? There are huge policy questions around technology that will determine if it's a force for good or a force for ill, in my view.
Excellent. Jose Luis, when I think about the perspective in Latin America versus Europe or North America, you'll be in a very different position when we think about Chinese technology, American, European, and how it influences the region. I wouldn't mind your perspectives on that.
I was thinking on that when she was speaking. Yeah, it's one of the challenges for both of us, I would say South America and North America. There is a good thing, a good sign on these last elections all over the region in South America. That is, people believe in their vote because they see they can produce dramatical change with their vote. It's one of the few things they believe. They can go from here to here with their vote without killing each other. Like in Argentina the other day, we had just a primary and 78% of the population went to vote. That shows, and they really turned. And was the same in Ecuador. So the belief in the vote as a tool is very strong. And at the vote, both things intersect, values and technology. And the votes can be stolen or twisted or kidnapped and free after midnight. All of the above. All of the above. Could be Russian interference. It could be Venezuelan interference through the counting system. And if we affect the vote through technology, we will lose a lot of confidence in voting. On the other hand, using this as an example, on the other hand, you have that the internet, even the cellular penetration is very high. The internet penetration in homes and school is very low. So kind of that the privacy issue is there, but the non-penetration issue for poor kids is also there. So it's kind of a delay on access to good internet. So what's the answer for that? Today, if you are the president of a theoretical country in South America, you have the difficult answer and the easy answer. The easy answer, you go Chinese. The easy answer is you go Chinese, you get a full package from CTE or Huawei, and you get deployment, and somebody will pay for it. The difficult answer is the one I would take, say, okay, well, I could come here, we'll try to convince him, then we go to Canada Exim Bank, then we go to OPIC, then we go to MIGA, and we may get it done. We may get it done, and I feel more comfortable. But after 1 year or 2 years, or you go Chinese or you do not deploy. So we have a challenge. We have to step in the shoes of any Latin American president, and for him the choice is against the calendar. And for him, the choice is against the clock. He has to make choices at the right time. And you need, deployment. And I would say, hey, but we have values. We believe in democracy. We believe in capitalism. We believe in free trade. So the countries that lead a democratic capitalist world has to create the tools to compete with the competitor. And the competitor is only, when you see in South America, okay, if you get into deep politics, geopolitics, guns, planes, Russia is a player. But if you only go to normal day life, for us, for mortals, we are all mortals. We don't do wars, we're just mortals. We have to do food, products, things like that. It's China or the US. In the US, you get a very good advice. In China, they give money to the guys. So we have to create the tools. We have to create the tools because technology gets into democracy. Technology gets into inclusion, and deployment is a demand. And even when the demand is not there, you know that on the first wave, technology includes a lot. On the first wave, includes a lot. Then they start piling up the data and selling it. But before, with the access, you access. So it has to be addressed from both sides, from responsible government in the small countries, and from creating tools to commercially compete.
That's great. Good insights. Guy, I'm going to go to a bit of a sensitive topic, if you don't mind. You, I think, have unique perspectives around the advents of technology, what privacy means. Desjardins has been through a theft of client information, and how's it impacted you? I think I saw in the news you were personally affected, and then also the company, and how does that then lead to the way you're thinking about change, and then how would we, for the audience, project that in terms of other ways that would layer into the conversation we just had?
Well, I think, yeah, this summer was quite a summer for Desjardins because we had a kind of a breach. And I think we learned a lot, not necessarily only about our operations, but the impact of this breach on the people. And I remember, I think 2 years ago, I was in a meeting with, and there was Thomas Friedman, and he was discussing about technology. And I remember that he said that there's 4 new powers, and you probably heard about it, but there's 4 new powers that comes with technology, and are going to reshape our planet right now. And I just want to remind you what are these four powers. He said there's the power of one. One person can have a huge impact on your company or on a country or in a society. That's what happened with Desjardins. One employee had a huge impact because he was having access to a lot of data. The second one is the power of machine. Machines are so powerful right now that they can have impact on democracy, and they have impact on an whole company and organization. The third one is power of flow. How much the data are going so fast around the globe right now. And in a second, you can transfer so much data from outside your company, or inside your company, from outside your country. And the fourth one is the power of man. The power of man. People have more power now. People can be in touch. You look in Hong Kong right now. You looked at it in France this summer. A group of people, because of technology, can connect so fast that they can have an impact on a society really rapidly. So I think what I've learned, of what we have learned is, and you just said it, is that I feel that I think technology is positive. On the long run, could be really positive, can build something for the future. But I feel sometimes that we are like at the beginning of the 80s with globalization. We were talking about globalization, that it will fix everything, it will be the heaven in the future, fairy tale, and everything will be okay. 30 years later now, we understand that there is collateral damage with that. We just should be really aware that technology in 20, 25 years, there'll be collateral damage. And what I've learned from this summer is the fact that people were, let's say, people were worried about their protection, their own protection. And I'm not so sure that the citizens are totally accurate about their own privacy, data privacy. People are putting their lives on Facebook, honestly, right now. You can know their father's name, their mom's name. All our, let's say, security process, we have to change it because people are putting their lives on Facebook right now. So when you ask someone to just authentify himself or herself about doing business with Desjardins, you ask some personal questions. We have to change these personal questions because all the personal questions are on Facebook right now. And the people can know your name, your family name, you went to school, you were on vacation last summer or last week. All questions that you can ask to identify, that we can ask to identify someone. So I think what I've learned this summer is the fact that we have to work with governments to build a stronger protection system with data in many, many countries. It's honestly, when you think of that, you try to identify someone in Canada right now to open an account in the financial system, and you use some cards that have been built in 1960, 65, your driver permits or your SIN number for social numbers. All these cards, all these authentication cards have been built at this time for another purpose than doing, let's say, banking services or doing business with someone. So I think this concept of protection of data and what's the role of our governments about authentication. Some countries around the globe, Estonia, Finland, Norway, were really, really, really proactive on that side. And from let's say 15 to 20 years ago, they decided that they'll be more proactive and build a system that is stronger. I think in many countries on the financial sector, we have to be more accurate on that because there'll be more and more breach. Maybe it's the way that the society will be in the future and people won't care about it. But I think now we should be more careful with, yes, the big tech, but also with all of the citizens about what kind of information you'll put on the technical platform.
Would you mind making a comment on how it affected your communities, your employees? Because I think there's a dynamic of how we think about your clients, but really...
Yeah, it was really interesting because the fact is that it's an employee who decided to misconduct or to do criminal activities and took some of our data, our members' data, and bring it outside Desjardins. And I think our employees, as a co-op, like I said, we are really integrated with communities. Our values are really strong. We want to build something on the long-term perspective. So I think the people felt that we have been cheated, honestly. There's some of ours, someone in our group decided that they'll do something that is criminal and that will be against our company. But what we have seen in the last 3 months is that we have been able, humbly, I think, we have been able to shift from a situation that was really, really negative to a situation that motivate our employees to do more. There's more than 3,000 employees who decided to be in the field, in our call center, in our cases network, just to be in touch with our members, clients, just reassuring them that, honestly, a breach is something, an identity theft is another thing. Don't be scared. We launched a protection program that will protect all of our members until they are members with us for the rest of their life, for any damage or that can happen to them. So we've changed. Just sometimes we say that people react when there's an emergency or there's a real threat. So that's what happened at Desjardins. The people react really, really positively. And what we have seen in the last, let's say, 2 months and a half is members, clients that still trust Desjardins because our brand is really, really strong. They looked at us. We were really transparent, really proactive. We were really clear in the media of what happened. Each week we were in the media, really, really honest with the people and the fact that we said the truth. And people in the society right now in Quebec and Ontario are looking at us and said, you know what, we trust you because you managed the situation without trying to hide anything. You were really transparent, really honest. It's a tough one, but you found solutions. And it motivates our employees. They're really proud. Actually, what's funny is that people are asking to become Desjardins employees just because they look at how we behave in the last 3 months and they're proud of what we have done. So that's it.
That's excellent. Why don't we transition the conversation to sustainable growth? And I think there's a dynamic going on in the world today. I think one of the panelists, and I apologize for each one, talked about the environmental crisis, which is being created, or the theme of crisis. Jose Luis, let's start with you. And when we think about the challenge between, particularly in a developing country, meeting environmental obligations or the pressure to meet environmental obligations versus the desire for growth, desire for stability, and how does that tension play out, let's say, in Latin America first?
Well, I think it has become a tool for growth. You know, the cost reduction in wind and solar and the big offer of financing for wind and solar make it very easy for countries to go big on this, and it's a tool of economic growth. It wasn't like this only 5 years ago, but it has changed because today you can do 1 mega with less than $700,000. So it has become a tool of growth. It also moved to building transmission lines, maybe to have a battery energy storage. So it has become a tool of growth. Then obviously there is a delay in other factors that could be also a win-win, like good houses, good houses in reforestation. The cycle is almost perfect, and it's also a very good tool for growth, and its long-term financing are viable. That is a place where Latin American countries can meet Europe, Canada, the US. The Chinese is too small, too much work, so they don't do it. So it's, they go 5 billion 5G. But they say, when you do 1,000 houses from wood every month, maybe you can do a marriage between Nordic countries or Canada with Ecuador or Argentina. So good, and the cycle of reforestation and good is a big, big opportunity. Then on the hydrocarbon sector, moving to European standard, again, something is coming from Europe, values, technology, standards. So this is, we want to talk about clean fuel, you say, okay, let's move into European standards. It's very easy. So, and that will need financing. You have a bunch of oil refineries all over Latin America, but that's another tool of growth. You can do the financing. It's a commodity, even with high countries, it could be done. So I believe green economy is a very, very big opportunity for economic growth in the region. It's a big opportunity for economic growth in the region, rather than being something that delays the process. So that there is where I believe is a big point of encounter of Europe, the US, Canada, and Latin America.
Interesting. I'd like to hear that. Lynn, when we think about some of the environmental challenges and how we look at sustainable development, and then the impact then on inclusion, the benefit to or the exclusion thereof.
So it's very heartening that the capital markets and businesses around the world have stepped up regardless of what some of the nations of the world have done. And I believe that is partly because of what you say, that it is becoming more profitable to invest in sustainable energy. But I also think that it's demand-driven. I think that the institutions that sign the principles for responsible investing, the institutions that signed up to Governor Mark Carney's task force for climate disclosure, TCFD, made a real commitment to putting money behind companies that are investing and building in a clean way. And so I'm optimistic that way, and we've got to have sustainability and inclusivity. I mean, inclusive capitalism is a sustainable, inclusive, dynamic, and trusted economic system. So we have to get there. I think that that we have to hope that governments, and the Canadian government, has been very, very good on climate as far as I know. And I think that we have to look at the fossil fuel industry as an industry that is contributing to jobs, is contributing innovation, is contributing to communities in many ways, and they are transitioning to a cleaner purpose, rather than just excoriating them. I don't believe in that. I believe that as investors, we should engage and try to get them to a clean future.
How do you feel?
Just 30 seconds.
Please.
I think it's a good anecdote. When she said consumer is driven by demand, is really driven by demand. And a lot of the demand is coming from kids. It comes from the kids because they are aware of the issue. We, until a year and a half ago, were only in hydrocarbons and electricity generation. And my 9-year-old came and said, Dad, I understand. We are in oil, that's what we do, okay. And we understand we're going to, but why don't you do something really useful? Why don't you go into lithium and batteries? And now we are developing 600,000 hectares of salads. And I say, why did you come with that? Well, because my friends made jokes that we were contaminating with the oil. So it comes from all over the place. We know if you do not transit, you will be left out of the picture. And this is a small anecdote. Shell is trying to become the biggest electricity provider of the world. So I think it's already there, and I think if we are intelligent, we have to use the power of those companies to transit.
Lynn, I was going to get you just to comment on what you think is happening with market forces pushing the governance change towards sustainability and moving that up on corporate agendas.
Again, I think that the large asset owners and are pushing it, as well as the children and the millennials. I mean, Morgan Stanley says that 86% of millennials, are going to insist that they invest in a sustainable and inclusive way. So I think the markets are doing it. I think that the role of government to turbocharge investments through subsidies. I mean, in the United States, we are still subsidizing the fossil fuel industry with hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And the effort to get, not even to take it away from them, but to also add it to renewables was hugely controversial and in fact failed in Congress. So certainly subsidizing clean energy is something that governments could do, and that would turbocharge it. But even without it, I think the market is demanding it.
That's great. I thought I'd do our last transition to you, Pierre, on Brexit. Bold predictions. I'm just kidding. That's an unfair question to ask you. Maybe for the audience's benefit, all sides talk about why they don't want a no-deal Brexit. What do you think the implications are for Europe, for the UK, and maybe more broadly around the world?
There is one first reason why we don't want a no deal. It's because we truly believe that the UK is a European country. When I'm sitting in the G7 finance ministers meeting, well, I see that, or it was the case also in Biarritz, on trade, on energy, on environment, on taxation, we have common positions. We, I'm French, are the two European nuclear powers. We are permanent members of the Security Council. And I think that would be absurd that we leave the UK deriving from Europe to get somewhere in between the Atlantic in a dream which won't be fulfilled, a kind of agreement between the US and UK. This cannot happen. I think that there will be some kind of agreement, but it must be a European country. It's the interest for Europe and it's the interest for the world. That's my first reason. The second one, of course, is about economics. A no deal would mean that companies that today commerce, exchange, without any kind of formalities, because they belong to the same customs union, would have to make these formalities. That the supply chains would be disrupted for quite a while. I will take just an example, aviation. I was in Hamburg a few months ago visiting Airbus, and they are built the best seller of Airbus, which is A320, A321. The wings, they are built in the UK. If there is a no deal, if there are customs control, if we are not capable of having an agreement together, then it will take 2 weeks or 3 weeks for these wings to come in Hamburg. What are the Germans doing? They have a plan B, and the plan B is that, well, this must be already in Hamburg. And so I think that we would have some very significant economic impact, customs impact, impact also on financial services. I'm not saying this will be a catastrophe. I think that the British economy is strong, resilient, that they will suffer a terrible blow in the beginning. That's what Mark Carney says. There have been figures, I'm not going to develop on that. And then it has the capacity to recover. But we would all be collectively weakened. That's why, for as well political and economic reasons, we don't favor a no deal. We believe that a deal is much better. I would even say, but there's no journalist here, of course, that remain would be better. I know there are. I was joking. There are always journalists everywhere. But I'm somebody who still believes that we are better with the UK in the EU than with the UK out of the EU. But it's up to the British people to decide that. We'll see. And it's not likely, of course. So we need to prepare for no deal or for a deal. We will continue discussing with the government. But one thing must be clear here is that the parameters of the agreement won't be changed. And that, for example, we need a backstop so that there is no physical border between North Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. This won't happen. So the priorities cannot be changed, but we are waiting for creative solutions, who knows, from the British government. And finally, since we don't know what will happen, since the political situation is that uncertain, changing every day almost, with a parliament that knows what it doesn't want, but that clearly has not been capable of saying what it wants, we need to prepare. And that's why the European Commission, for the member states, is preparing the eventuality of a no deal, which might happen on the 21st of October. To sum up, we don't want it. We think that's the worst case scenario. We have to prepare for it. And of course, we need to do our best efforts in order to avoid it.
Excellent thoughts to close us off. So let me first off thank our panelists. Hopefully you'll agree with me. We set a great foundation for the conference. We covered a very wide range of topics and a very wide range of perspectives. I thought they made an excellent contribution, and let's give them a round of applause.